Even during the war, she was working to save money to bring her parents over. Only later did she learn that they'd been killed. If I'd been born just 10 years earlier and become disabled in Germany, it is almost certain that the German doctor would also have advised that I be institutionalized. The difference is that instead of growing up being fed by nurses in a small room with white walls and a roommate, I would have been taken to a special clinic, and at that special clinic, I would have been killed. Before Auschwitz and Dachau, there were institutions where disabled children were eliminated. Hitler's pilot project for what would ultimately become mass genocide started with disabled children. Doctors encouraged the parents to hand their young children over to specially designated pediatric clinics where they were either intentionally starved or given a lethal injection. When the program expanded to include older children, the doctors experimented with gassing. 5,000 children were murdered in these institutions. The Nazis considered people with disabilities a genetic and financial burden on society, life unworthy of life. So when an authority figure in their new country, a doctor, said to my parents, "We will take your daughter out of your home and raise her," they never would have agreed to it. They came from a country where families got separated, some children sent away, others taken from their families by the authorities and never returned, all as part of a campaign of systematic dehumanization and murder. Their daughter, disabled or not, wasn't going anywhere. Parents weren't obstinate or anti-authoritarian. They were thinkers. They had learned what happens when hatred and inhumanity are accepted. Both my father and my mother were brave people who lived by their values. They had personally experienced what happens when an entire country chooses not to see something simply because it is not what they wish to see. And as a result, they never accepted anything at face value. When something doesn't feel right, they taught us, you must question it, whether it is an instruction from an authority or what a teacher says in class. At the same time, my parents didn't dwell on the past or on things that were done to them. They didn't forget the past, and they definitely learned from it. But Ilse and Werner Heumann moved forward. Especially Ilse. She was an optimist and a fighter, and so am I. I can't say I was thinking about all these things when we took over the San Francisco Federal Building, or even when I took on the New York City Board of Education. Only now, looking back, can I see how it all came together to turn me into the person I was to become. Part 1. Brooklyn, New York, 1953. Chapter 1. The Butterfly. Some people say that what I did changed the world. But really, I simply refused to accept what I was told about who I could be, and I was willing to make a fuss about it. I must say right up front, though, that it wasn't actually an I, it was a we. For any story of changing the world is always the story of many. Many ideas, many arguments, many discussions, many late-night, punchy, falling-apart, laughing brainstorms, many believers, many friendships, many failures, many times of almost giving up, and many, many, many people. This is my story, yes, but I was one in a multitude, and I hope I will do justice to the many heroes, those who are alive and those no longer among us. To begin at the beginning, I will tell you about what happened after my parents refused to institutionalize me, about my childhood, so you will understand what the world was like then. Before we took over the San Francisco Federal Building, before people crawled up the steps of the Capitol, before systemic change began. In 1953, I was 6. Dwight D. Eisenhower was president. Elizabeth Taylor was a box office star. Jackie Robinson had just recently broke the color line in baseball, and World War II had ended a mere 8 years earlier. Elvis Presley had 3 years to go before his breakthrough on the Ed Sullivan Show. The Dodgers were still in Brooklyn, and much of America, celebrating the advent of peace and prosperity, was in the throes of having 7 million babies, the baby boom.